This is DaveNoseworthyMMA.
As hoped, this past weekend's UFC event delivered. 218 had just about everything fans love about the sport, from the first fight on the prelims right on down to the main event. The card had knockouts, technical knockouts, submissions, long drawn-out 3-round battles, come-from-behind victories, and all three of the high-profile bouts were fantastic. We even got a Knockout of the Year Canada date, with Ngannou finishing Overeem in a terrifying manner. All in all, I would think that most fans, hardcore and casuals alike, would grade this event with an A. But I can't speak for the fan base, just myself. Just as Carlos Moneres, a Detroit Free Press contributor, spoke for himself when he essentially crapped all over the event in a piece he wrote the following day. I, like many, came across the article on Twitter, seeing MMA media and the fan base just hammering him for how inaccurate it was. So it caught my attention, and I clicked on that link with the headline that read, UFC 218 in Detroit lacked great fights, novel production, and was underwhelming. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Whether or not a sporting event or a music concert is good is subjective. You can put whatever narrative you want on any situation, I suppose, but despite feeling that way, I'm not even through the title of this article, and there are at least 2 things I'm reading that are factually incorrect. But I wanted to give the author the benefit of the doubt because I have a very strong bias. I'm obsessed with the sport, and I have been for a very long time. But with all that being said, I do feel as though I can be pretty objective when it does call for it. So I had a look and got almost halfway through before I just had to stop. The journalist is blatantly uninformed on the sport of MMA, and I have to imagine combat sports in general, despite claiming to be a fan of collegiate wrestling and boxing. But in my experience, whether or not you're a fan and a follower of this sport, that generally doesn't have anything to do with its entertainment value across the board for all consumers. I have many different examples over the years that I think of, but the one at the forefront of my mind is when I traveled to Montreal in 2012 for UFC 154 St. Pierre versus Condon. It was on really short notice that I decided to make the trip, so planning to get fellow fight fan buddies together to hop on a plane was just out of the question, but luckily, one of my good friends lives there, and he agreed to go with me. But the thing is this, not only is he not a fan of MMA, I would consider him anti-sports. It's just something that was never of interest to him. So I was curious to see what a prolific artist on the local Montreal music scene was going to think of a live UFC event, especially going into it with having no experience watching MMA on TV, let alone in person. Looking back, if I were to compare UFC 154 with 218, I would definitely consider 218 to be more action-packed and entertaining card, because 154 had its fair share of drama, but in comparison, 218 just had more star power. So anyone that has ever been to a live UFC event can attest there is nothing like it. And that night, my friend, who has had no previous interest in MMA whatsoever, and who only knew who Georges St. Pierre was because he lived in Montreal and GSP was probably at the height of his popularity at that time, he came away from the Bell Center that night saying that the event we had just witnessed was the best live show he's ever seen. And it was an experience we had from the upper bowl, no less. Not that I or MMA needed it, but for me, it did sort of validate that the sport I've been obsessed with all the years is something special. It is impossible to observe that action in person and not have a visceral experience. Ariel Helwani once said that the MMA fan base is like a fraternity, so it's no surprise that we get our backs up and react when we see an article like the one published from the Detroit Free Press, especially when it's coming off the heels of an event with some amazing moments. Alvarez and Gaethje met the hype. Overeem versus Ngannou was fireworks, just as any contest between 2 elite striker heavyweights should be. And Holloway versus Aldo was an exciting fight with an emphatic finish and a classic passing of the torch, with Holloway showing nothing but class, with praising Aldo and just giving him respect post-fight, which always caps things off nicely. I would be willing to bet that this article got more attention than anything the journalist has ever done in his career, but not for the right reasons. And I don't mean to pile on, because God knows he has taken enough heat on social media so far, and it's likely not even over yet, but I do take exception to the message that he's put out there. In the article, there was also a real sense of entitlement in the fact that the card that was held in the city of Detroit wasn't up to snuff because it had just one title fight, when in reality, With all due respect to the city, which I actually happen to have heard a lot of great things about over the past few days, Detroit is more of a place where a free televised fight night card would be held, not a high-profile pay-per-view event. If there's one thing the MMA media and fan base can do and has done in the past is be quick to acknowledge the quality of an event, whether it's amazing or awful. Nobody is harder on the UFC than its consumers, and by all accounts, this event was a hit. Which is why this article raised so many eyebrows and personally made me wonder if there was some other agenda or reasoning for the very negative critique from this journalist. I'm curious if his experience was soured in some way. Why so dismissive and bitter about an event that was very well received across the board from all types of fans and media? Your guess is as good as mine. So I think that in the future, the best bet for Mr. Monera's and the Detroit Free Press is to come and cover these events without the chip on your shoulder, or don't come at all.